Mr. Genuis, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
Great to see you. So 2017, November, you were named the Parliamentarian of the Year. You've got quite an impressive resume, and it's pleasure to be able to speak to you today.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor serving my constituents. I know you mentioned I was 28 when I was first elected.
Yes.
I feel like I've aged 20 or 30 years in those 6 years, got more gray hairs. But look, when you're in a role like this, you never know how long you're going to last, right? So it's worth throwing yourself into it. And some of these causes that we're talking about now, Afghanistan, improving the immigration system, these are things that I've really been kind of dove into from the beginning. And so it's interesting to see kind of where those files have gone.
Grays are a mark of wisdom, they say.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Genuis, let's start with the ongoing campaign.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party's pitch in this election, that is quite interesting for a lot of people, because there are a lot of policy platforms that have been introduced for the very first time, like whether it being the pro-worker messaging and all the announcements that have been made by your leader, or first time ever that you have a climate plan. How do you see this repositioning, and why is it important now in this election?
Well, one of the things that we chose to do in this campaign is right at the beginning, put our platform out there. And that's, at a process level, that's very different. But the platform's also long, detailed. I think at times in the past we've had some good ideas, we've had some good intentions. We haven't been as detailed or as explicit, and this is an opportunity to really be clear about that. And you look at the contrast in the election. I think it's working to our advantage, where Justin Trudeau calls an early election that many people said we didn't need, but then has not come forward with a Liberal platform. We still, almost the halfway mark, have no Liberal platform, whereas Conservatives, although we said now was not the right time for an election, we were ready right out at the beginning to put our ideas in front of Canadians. And what a lot of the polling suggests, in fact, is that Canadians have a lot of doubts, a lot of questions about what the Prime Minister may be planning that he hasn't revealed in terms of spending, in terms of government control. What we used to call a hidden agenda, it's actually more of an issue on the Liberal side in the public mind, whereas Conservatives have been very, very transparent and clear. And good policies on environment, on immigration, on supporting workers. These are things that are very much aligned with Conservative principles, but they're new ideas all the same about how we secure our future and pass a strong society on to the next generation.
But do you think that, how do you see this? It's almost like a shift to the left with all these promises and all these announcements that are coming out from the Conservative platform. How do you think that this is going to hold up? Because some people, there is a certain level of skepticism that this could just be a ploy to impress the voters so that they vote in the favor of the Conservatives. Or should there be a minority situation that the NDP finds it very tempting to support the Conservative minority to get into power rather than go with the Liberals? So how do you make people believe that all of a sudden this thought shift is actually here to stay?
Well, so I would say one thing about the initial description, and that is that I don't really like to conceive of politics in a straight left-right spectrum. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. There are different issues. I know there are many people, for instance, from different cultural communities who have very conservative values on a broad range of issues, but have been looking for those clear signals around immigration, around inclusion, around human rights. And there is nothing unconservative about taking those positions. I mean, it's very consistent with who we are, but it's also clearly walking that out in terms of the policy commitments. And I think what we've seen for the last 6 years is a lot of insincerity from the Liberals, promises that haven't been delivered on. So everybody's going to look at an election at politicians with a little bit of a side eye and say, how do we know whether it's Liberal, Conservative, NDP, anyone else? How do we know they really mean it? And I would just say you've had 6 years of failure to follow through, failure to deliver on promises, big deviation from what was said and what was done. Give Conservatives a chance to deliver on our clear commitments. You know who you can't trust, and give us that opportunity to earn your trust and earn your support going forward by delivering on these commitments.
On the matter of trust, how do you see a lot of your provincial cousins, the Conservatives, they are sidestepping from the Conservative campaign, even to the point that Doug Ford in Ontario has clearly told his caucus members and staff to stay away from the Conservative federal campaign. and the newly sworn premier in Nova Scotia, he categorically distanced his party from the federal Conservatives. How do you see that panning out, and that lack of endorsement from the provincial counterparts per se?
Well, I don't think it's so much a lack of support, but I think it's also the case that provincial governments are very focused on the work that they have in front of them. And what we've seen a lot of during this pandemic is pointing of fingers between different levels of government. The campaign started with this kind of intimation that there was going to be a bit of a truce on the campaign trail between Trudeau and the Ford government. And then within a week, the Trudeau government was attacking the Ford government. And what we see is the federal government may be failing in certain aspects of their pandemic response, wanting to blame provinces. And then that kind of pointing fingers happening back and forth. And look, I think every government should be focused on responding to the people that elect them. We're going to work constructively with every government. We're going to work with Conservative provincial governments. We're going to work constructively with the NDP government here in BC, and we're not going to take a pointing fingers federalism approach. We're going to try to listen and make those connections, and ultimately, you know, our leader, Aaron O'Toole, Federal Conservative Party, we're articulating a vision that reflects where we're at as a party, our values and convictions. There may be some distinctions between the way we approach certain issues and provincial governments of various names, conservative and otherwise, and that's okay, right? We can still have good relations even if we don't always agree 100%.
There were certain bills and certain files that before the election got called or before the parliament took a break for the summer, which were in the news, which were in the headlines. Let's talk about the Bill C-10 first.
Yeah.
What role do you think CRTC has in the current media landscape?
Well, it's an important question because the media landscape is obviously changing. There was a policy framework that was put in place in the context of sort of scarcity of spectrum before the internet, and so big questions now about how that changes and do we kind of fit the online world into that existing framework, or are there other ways of doing this? And we want to be able to support Canadian media. We want to be able to support Canadian artists, but do so without giving CRTC expansive powers to do things like regulate social media algorithms. It's a big threat to free speech when you have a government agency that can strongly shape kind of what algorithms are producing, what kinds of outcomes. You still have the freedom to speak in a sense, but you don't have the freedom to be heard if that agency can say, okay, this content is worth promoting over this other content. So having that sort of pro-Canadian approach, but without micromanaging within that, the kind of level of control that C-10 envisions.
Who should the responsibility of a defamatory comment on social media or something slanderous posted on social media, who should that rest with? Should that be with the social media company, or should that be with the person who makes the post? Because I think that's another point of contention in this whole discussion. Yeah.
Well, I do just want to emphasize, though, that Bill C-10 did not deal with defamatory content. It also didn't deal with hate speech. That's a different category. So Bill C-10 was about the discoverability of Canadian content.
Right.
So and some people tried to meld those issues when we were criticizing C-10. People said, well, we got to stop hate speech. No, hate speech is not dealt with by C-10. That's a Canadian content framework question. We have laws on hate speech, on defamatory content. Those obviously need to be enforced. And our platform calls for clear criminalization of any kind of incitement to violence. And I think we've got to take a constructive, realistic approach with social media platforms, to just, to get that kind of content that's inciting violence down as soon as possible. Ultimately, of course, the person who posts it has the greatest responsibility, but platforms should obviously do whatever they reasonably can.
There was also another bill for banning conversion therapy, and you voted specifically against that bill. What was your reason to not vote in favor of it?
Yeah, so this is a very important thing to clarify, because conservatives oppose conversion therapy. We want to ban conversion therapy, and we're united in that. I strongly believe we need to ban conversion therapy. There is a problem with the way conversion therapy has been defined in the legislation, because when most people hear conversion therapy, those who are aware of it, a lot of people maybe aren't aware of it, but those who are aware, they associate that with sort of violent coercive efforts to bring about a change in a person's sexual orientation. It doesn't work. It's not scientific. It's violent. It's abusive. I mean, it's wrong, right? And we should be able to have legislation that clearly bans that. But when we looked at Bill C6 when it first came forward, they actually used a definition that was incorrect. It essentially applied the label conversion therapy to include any kind of conversation that was about reducing sexual behavior in a certain context. So a case where family members might say to a young person, hey, you should wait till you're older before becoming sexually active. And not it being about sexual orientation, just saying, straight, gay, whatever, we're giving you this advice about waiting till you're older or whatever. And that would be a case where actually that could get triggered by the definition of conversion therapy, even that simple conversation. So we tried to be constructive. We said, hey, let's fix the definition and then we'll work together to pass the bill. The government was kind of obstinate about saying, like, we're not going to do that. So at second reading, most Conservatives supported it. I abstained, and there was generally a will at the initial stage. But then when it got to third reading, it was the final stage of the bill with that wording, and it was like, well, either we're going to put this bill into place that's going to have all these far-reaching consequences, or but what we've said as Conservatives now, we're into an election. Obviously, it was the government's decision to call an election, which killed the bill in any event. So now, what we're proposing, it's very clearly in our platform. A Conservative government will bring forward a ban on conversion therapy with a clear definition. And that's something that I think everybody should be able to get behind, a ban on conversion therapy with a clear definition, and we'll get it done. Liberals haven't been able to get it done, and we'll get it done.
I do want to spend some time on the immigration policy that you briefly touched upon in the beginning. Now, it was the Conservative government which, instead of giving visas to parents and grandparents, instead of expanding that program where parents and grandparents could come into the country as a permanent resident, the super visa program was started, which transferred the cost or the burden of healthcare of those seniors onto the families. Now, with the family reunification plan that your party is proposing now, would that change, or would there be more of a scope to bring more parents and grandparents into the country?
Yeah, so important question. I think the family reunification piece and the super visa piece are both important, right? Like we want to be able to have a strong system for welcoming parents and grandparents. And it's good for that super visa to be available as well. Remember, I mean, not everybody wants to become a permanent resident, right? There are people that they want to have the ability to come and stay for an extended period of time. So we've proposed changes on both of those fronts to improve both of those systems. So on the family reunification side, we are going to replace the lottery system with a fairer system that is first come, first serve, and that also prioritizes based on certain criteria. So when there are real needs of care in the family, for example, that's one thing that makes sense to prioritize. That it's a way of supporting child care and that. So we are going to reform to improve the fairness of that parents and grandparent system. We're also, though, going to extend the super visa to allow for, instead of 2 years, up to 5 years. So we're going to make both of those channels easier. I mean, it's sort of a more general immigration commitment, but I'll just say as well, commitment to expediting processing. We have a number of proposals around expediting processing. One is if people make small inadvertent errors on their immigration application, they should be able to correct those errors without needing to resubmit the entire application.
Right.
Another is just simplifying and improving the efficiency of those applications, but then allowing people to pay an expedited processing fee and using all of that money to go back into immigration processing. So we'll be able to significantly increase the processing capacity of the government on immigration without that burden falling to the taxpayer. We'll do it by having that expedited processing fee, which helps everybody. Even if you don't pay that fee, you're still benefiting by the expanded processing
because it's going into the pool. But do we know how much of that extra fee would be? Is there an amount defined for that yet? Like 20%, 25%, or whatever? So
we haven't specified what that would be. I think it's possible that we could even have different levels of expedited processing. If there's we have these systems in place for passports, and they should be reflective of that actual cost, right? It should be, if a person is paying for expedited processing, it should be reflective of the cost of the time of that public servant to do that processing. Right. Because if we're hiring extra capacity, it shouldn't be just token. It should be cost reflective. And the goal is to be able to use those resources to expand that processing capacity significantly. And look, I mean, it just makes sense to, in some cases, this will save people money, right? Mm-hmm. If you're supporting a family member overseas,
correct,
and you can just speed up the application so that they're able to come to Canada rather than needing to support them overseas, they're able to establish themselves here in Canada. So this is I think a strong, effective, and compassionate.
And not to mention the emotional burden that you have to carry with them being.
I mean, I can't imagine being away from your spouse for months or years at a time while you wait for these things to process. People being apart from spouses, apart mm-hmm. from children, it's really a challenging and tragic situation, and we've got to resolve it.
Mr. Genuis, I wish we had more time because there's so many other issues that I would like to talk to you about. But I do want to ask you, with all that's going on in the world, with U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan and all that happened within a matter of days, how the Taliban took over, and overall, the shift in the power structure all over the world, especially during the pandemic, do you think that the world is now undergoing a seismic shift where the torch of that power, that superpower of the world, that is being passed on to other nations? And how do you see this shift happen? What's your viewpoint on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll just say I'm happy to come back anytime to further the conversation on this and anything else. I think the world is going through very, very significant changes. I think we're kind of going back to a time of multipolarity in the world. Mm-hmm. The way I would describe it is this. So there's that famous line from that book from Francis Fukuyama talking about the end of history, right? And, mm-hmm. and then I think for a period of time there was this view that we've reached this end of history, dominance of one political model, and I think now we're living through kind of the return of history, where we mm-hmm. recognize that we all hope and I believe that free democratic values will prevail. But we understand that we can't take that for granted. There are many different political models. There's competition between those political models. Mm-hmm. And the answer to that for me is we can't be complacent or presumptive about the direction of history. If we look at the world today, the threats to freedom, democracy, security, we need to stand up for our values if we want them to prevail, because there will be continuous competition. And we see how the government of China is trying to take advantage of the situation in Afghanistan, and we see threats here at home, foreign state-backed interference here in Canada. And these are things that we shouldn't be panicked about, but we also shouldn't be complacent about. And we need a government in Canada that recognizes the Canadian capacity for global leadership at this time. I think we are well positioned as a country. We have a strong domestic experience of federalism and pluralism, commitment to human rights. We have a great history of a strong military contributing to the advance of justice and protection of human dignity around the world. Let's have a government in Canada that's prepared to stand strong and be part of these important conversations of the 21st century.
Mr. Genuis, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.